Hi, welcome to the next video in this series of the theory of teaching and methodology. Now we're going to focus on the next phase, usually the longest phase in a lesson, which is the drilling phase. We've covered already lead-ins and all the principles behind teaching, and now it's time to apply these principles and make sure that your students progress in your lesson so that they actually achieve some kind of goal, or at least develop certain skills, improve on certain aspects of their game, so that they have fun and that they feel like they accomplished something, which is also very motivating for them and keeps them coming back. So when you try to progress in a lesson, it's always important to take one step at a time and keep it as simple as possible so that people can actually follow the steps. I like to compare it to learning to play the piano. If you start playing the piano, you start actually putting your finger on certain keys, and then you hear a sound. And if you compare this to drilling techniques with a non-resistant partner, then rolling at the end of the lesson would be like playing free jazz in a jam session with experienced musicians while everything is on fire and somebody is trying to kill you. So that's basically what beginners might feel like when they first come into a lesson. That's why it's important to introduce them step by step to what grappling is, and also guide them through the lesson. And that's easy done, where we can do that by reducing things at the beginning and adding complexity over time. One can put sports into like 4 categories that I took from a trainer's education program from judo in Germany. There are like 4 categories. The first one is the simplest, so to speak. It's like weightlifting. It's one where you have a constant situation. There isn't really much changing, and you only have to perform one move, like the snatch. The bar is always the same weight. The weights are always the same weight. You're usually wearing the same clothes, the same shoes. The floor is prepared in a certain way. So you exactly know how much time you have. You have your ritual. You go to the bar, and there's nothing that is really distracting you from what you're going to do and what you want to do. And nothing is going to mess with your technique, your setup, or anything like that. Then you perform your lift, and it's all up to you. Then the second category would be, for example, gymnastics. There everything is still quite constant. You have certain elements that you have to do. Maybe this time it's not just one move you have to do, but it's multiple movements like tumbling, spinning, and all that in a sequence. You already have some aspect of freestyle. You cannot go freestyle in weightlifting. There are very, very specific rules of how the bar has to move and how you are allowed to move your body in relation to the bar. So in gymnastics, you have this certain element of freedom, but still standards for the movements. What is a good movement? What is a bad movement? And you try to be as perfect as possible in executing a specific movement. And usually there's nobody really messing with you while you do that. So that would be category 2. The third category is a sport like tennis. So there you now have an opponent, somebody who is playing the ball back, and you usually don't know exactly where he's or she's going to play the ball into your field. So there are some changing conditions also. You have like the weather. It can be windy, it can be cold, it can be hot, all that. And so there is this certain element of uncertainty in the sport. And again, you now have some kind of resistance, so to speak. And then there are sports like the sport that we are doing, grappling. There, everything stops being perfect. It stops being predictable. Things become messy. Grappling is rather chaotic, and people have to learn to deal with this situation. And they cannot do it right from the beginning themselves. Of course, there are some people like I don't know what to call them, but they simply come to your grappling club and they do not have any trouble with this chaotic situation. They can easily manage themselves in these situations, keep their composure. But usually people tend to tension, and then you have these spazzy white belts who try to do whatever they can to survive with all their physical abilities that they have. So you should be aware of these 4 stages, because these 4 stages kind of help you to reduce each movement, concept, technique to doing it in a safe and very predictable environment, and then moving on to a more and more chaotic situation. So, for example, this is one example how you can progress in a lesson. There are many other ways, but this is one way you can do it quite safely, and you can do it in this kind of step-by-step approach, which makes it also quite easy to instruct people on doing this. So the first phase, the weightlifting, the one move that's very predictable, is drilling. Drilling without much resistance or without any resistance, with predictable counters or movements by your partner, which you have already talked about, and you practice one move. Again, like I talked about in the learning objectives video, maybe you just work on going for the underhook with your left arm in half guard, for example. And you do that without any resistance, and then you tell your partner, okay, now put your weight a little bit more onto me, and maybe do not open your armpit as much, and then you try to do it again. The second stage would be still considered drilling by me. That's when you maybe add different limbs to that drill. Like in half guard, you do not only go for the underhook, but you do at the same time protect your head against the underhook movement with your right arm, and you're trying to prevent the person from passing your knee line with one leg, and maybe with the other leg you are fishing for a butterfly hook, for half butterfly guard or anything like that. So you start doing things simultaneously, maybe even chaining different sweeps or techniques together, like going from one sweep to the left to the right side. So there is some element of freedom there, still not a lot of resistance or predictable resistance, just to add another layer. Instead of having just one thing to do, now you have a choice to do maybe 2 things or 3 things. And the more advanced the people are, the more things they can try to figure out at the same time. And then you move on into micro sparring or mini sparring, or positional sparring. So the resistance is now unpredictable, or the counter movements are now not predictable. So your partner decides what he or she wants to do, which way she would like to defend the first sweep that you try, and then you have to come up with another sweep, or moving to another guard, or going for a submission, for example. So things are changing much more, and now you have some resistance, and you can then add on layers of these possibilities. You open up the drill for more freedom, and then you will end up in some kind of full-on sparring, where now everything has to be done at the same time. But you can, when you progress like this, you can make it easier for people to actually move from one layer to the next layer to the next layer, and to understand the position, the technique, the concept that they are working on, or improving or getting some time to actually improve on a certain skill, to then use it at the end of the lesson in a full-on sparring, if possible. Again, full-on sparring does not mean 100% full intensity, I am going to rip your head off mode. It's usually for our classes something between 60 and 80%, just to keep it safe and to not run down our bodies too much. In general, when you go from one layer to the next, it's always important to keep the 10 principles that I talked about in the very first video of this series in mind. Especially here we can see it in the middle, the clear instruction and the meaningful communication. So it's very important that you are aware of the different layers that you will go through. And it's also important that you keep an eye on your students, that they actually stay at the level that you actually want them to practice at. So, of course, when you have intermediate or advanced students, you should give them the freedom to decide themselves when to ramp up the speed, intensity, when to make your partner give your partner the freedom to make decisions themselves, which resistance they would like to give you, which counter movements they would like to do, all that. But first, at the beginner level, you should make them stick to what you told them to do, so that they actually practice this aspect that you want them to practice, as it is something that you've planned and that contributes to the goal of the lesson and the training cycle in general. By doing this, you help move your students through 4 stages of competence throughout one lesson, maybe throughout the drilling phase, throughout the training cycle, and in general throughout their grappling career. So there are 4 stages: unconscious incompetence, conscious incompetence, conscious competence, and unconscious competence. The first stage is unconscious incompetence. So those are the beginners. They have never seen much about grappling, and they don't even know what they are doing wrong, because they don't know what they're doing in general. So they have no idea about the fact that they are doing lots of things wrong. That would be the very beginning of any stage. It could be at the beginning of a lesson that you introduce something like mount bottom, and they have no idea that they're doing something wrong when they're simply laying on their back. So that would be the very beginning of the lesson. Also, when we talk about a training cycle, when we introduce a concept, maybe they don't know that there are concepts in general, or that this concept, the specific concept exists, so they cannot, or that they don't know that they are violating the rules of that concept. And as I learned by listening to the Villain Cast by Chris Paynes, you can also apply this he applies it to the different belt levels. Like this would be the white belt stage. Then there is conscious incompetence. That's when people are aware of the fact that they don't know, or that they are not able to do certain things. So that would be the blue belt level, according to Chris Paynes. This is where you make people aware of the fact that there is something that they are not able to do, or that they don't know of. And now you start working on that. You can start doing that by drilling, and they get some feedback on a certain technique. and they now know, okay, I'm doing something wrong, and now I can start to identify what I'm doing wrong, and then try to improve that. Third stage is then the drilling phase in a lesson, or the purple belt stage, where people are now aware of the fact that they can do things. They know how to move, they know how to apply a certain concept, maybe they know how to execute a certain technique against a resisting opponent. So they can now actually identify why things work, and they can willingly do things to make them work. And then there's the last stage, that is the unconscious competence, which is the end, so to speak, of this spectrum. This is when you do not no longer have to think about what you're doing. This is what we want people to achieve at the end. Maybe at the end of a lesson where they have learned how to go for an underhook in half guard, and by drilling progressively and with different partners and getting some feedback, they may reach the stage where, when they're rolling at the end of the lesson, all of a sudden simply feel like it's now the correct moment to go for an underhook in half guard, or that they do this before the other person can establish half guard top. And they do not go by, oh, now I have to go for an underhook and then dig for the underhook, but they simply do it, position their body correctly to do it within the given scenario. And this is what we would like people to be able to do. Yes, of course, you have to, when you want to teach, at least you should be able to know why things work and how you can, because then you can teach people to make things work themselves. But for a good grappler, this is the thing that they need. They need to do things correctly. They don't know they don't need to know how they did it. They don't need to be able to explain why and how they did it. They simply have to execute it in the right moment at the right time. So they have to make the decision either very, very quickly, or it has to be something that happens subconsciously without active decision making. So that's what the ultimate goal is. This is what everything should be geared towards, because this is being a competent grappler, executing techniques, applying concepts in a situation that you do not know, and still are able to win points, or get into a dominant position, or even submit somebody. So in general, you as a coach have to make people aware of these stages. You don't have to go by, now you are consciously competent, because that's not what it should be like. But you should simply tell them, okay, now you know what the problem is. Now you can go look for possible solutions. So then when they're looking for possible solutions, now you've got a possible solution. Now try to drill this with a partner and try to figure out if it really works. And if it works, then you ramp up intensity, speed, complexity, and so on and so forth, which I will talk about in the next video in more detail. And then they can either make the decisions much more quickly, or they can simply reach a stage where they, or simply, where they can reach a stage where they do not have to think about it anymore, but simply go for certain things. This can then lead to the ultimate goal of being a good grappler. Yeah, next video I will talk about drilling, how you can manage drills, and how you can actually use certain parameters to modify drills depending on the level of your students, and also how drills can actually teach your students to learn and how they should develop their own learning skills with that. And then I will wrap it up when I will talk about difficulties and how you can problem solve your lessons and things that go wrong in your lessons while being actually coaching. Okay, so see you next time.